A military intervention growing increasingly likely. West African troops are in place on Gambia's border, awaiting the deadline for President Yahya Jammeh to step down.
A group linked to Al-Qaeda's North African affiliate has said it carried out a suicide bombing at a military camp in northern Mali earlier on Wednesday that killed dozens of people and injured over 100. A suicide car bomb in Baghdad, claimed by the so-called Islamic State, has killed more than a dozen people and wounded 50 others.
I am pleased to award our nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Civilians were among the casualties in the eastern Ukrainian town of Avdiivka after an escalation in fighting between government troops and Russia-backed separatists.
We want to take you to D.C. We have been monitoring the Women's March coming out of Washington and across the entire world.
Chile is under a state of emergency as more than a dozen large wildfires threaten towns in the center and south of the country.
To convey its concern about this unique moment and issue a call to leaders and citizens across the globe to put the world on a safer footing, the board takes the unprecedented step, the first time in its history, of moving the clock hand 30 seconds closer to midnight. Today we move the clock a half minute closer to midnight. It is now 2.5 minutes to midnight.
We're going to move on now to the chaos, confusion, and anger growing in the wake of President Trump's immigration ban. Protests all across the country, reaction from around the world after the president signed his executive order late Friday.
Well, avalanches have claimed the lives of nearly 70 people in Afghanistan and neighboring Pakistan. At least 54 people were killed in Afghanistan over the past few days.
At its press conference today, NASA rocked a lot of people's worlds. Using the Spitzer Space Telescope, astronomers have identified 7 Earth-sized planets orbiting a star known as TRAPPIST-1.
From Russia's foreign ministry, more details on the death of their UN envoy, Vitaly Cherkin. He has died.
A dramatic final showdown over the Dakota pipeline in North Dakota. In fact, pictures coming in just moments ago. Police moving in right there to make their arrests.
After retaking eastern Mosul, US-backed Iraqi forces have begun the much more difficult battle for the West in an all-out offensive to dislodge ISIL from its last major city stronghold in the country.
6 years ago, peaceful protesters took to the streets of a modern, complex, multicultural country, Syria. But what some had hoped would be a Syrian spring instead deteriorated into the horrifying civil war that's claimed more than 400,000 lives.
We want to turn overseas tonight to a massive day of protests in Russia. A wave of anti-corruption rallies across the country, the largest in years. Demonstrators clashing with police in Moscow, hundreds arrested, a vocal opponent of Russian President Vladimir Putin detained, and new questions being raised after surveillance video appears to show the assassination of another Putin critic.
We are following breaking news, reports of a gas or some kind of chemical attack in Syria. After that, a French news agency says a rocket slammed into a hospital where doctors were treating the victims.
وأولادي راحوا أنا عند رب أحسن من كل الرؤساء. أطفالي أنا ما هو أول أطفال 2 استشهدوا. صحيح حلوين كتير.
A major security operation was underway in the Afghan capital, Kabul, after an attack on the city's military hospital. The attack began with a suicide bombing before gunmen entered the hospital, which is across the road from the US Embassy.
Last night, the UN Security Council unanimously condemned North Korea's latest ballistic missile test. It called Sunday's launch a grave violation of international law. China signed onto that statement.
Well, we are tracking the natural disaster in southern Colombia right now. Officials there say mudslides have killed at least 112 people. Many others are missing or injured. Heavy rain has triggered the slides, which washed away houses and bridges.